My friends, I need to tell you a story. It's not a pleasant story, but it's one that every person on this planet needs to hear. It's about power, greed, and the price ordinary people pay when empires play their games. What if I told you that? The coffee you drink this morning might have blood on it, that the banana in your lunch was picked by people whose grandparents were murdered for wanting a fair wage, that the oil in your car comes from countries where democracy was strangled in its cradle. This isn't some wild conspiracy theory, my friends. This is documented history, declassified documents, confessions from the very people who did these things. And tonight, I'm going to tell you the whole ugly truth. 50 countries, millions of deaths, 70 years of secret wars, all so that a handful of corporations could get richer while the rest of the world burned. Are you ready for this journey? Because once you know this story, you can never unknow it. Let me take you back to 1947. World War II is over. America is the most powerful country on earth. And President Harry Truman makes a decision. That will change everything. He creates the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, they told us it was just for gathering information, just to keep America safe. But within months, the CIA becomes something much darker. It becomes the sword of American empire. This man here, Allen Dulles. Remember his face. He's about to become the most dangerous man in the world. Under his leadership, the CIA will perfect the art of destroying nations. Let me tell you about Iran in 1953. Beautiful country, ancient civilization. And they had a leader named Mohammad Mossadegh, who dared to do something radical. He said Iran's oil should belong to Iranians. Imagine that. This man looked at British and American companies, stealing his nation's wealth, and said no more. He nationalized the oil industry. The response was swift and brutal. The CIA spent just $100,000, that's like $500,000 today, to hire thugs, bribe officials, and turn the streets of Tehran into chaos. In 4 days, they destroyed Iranian democracy. Mossadegh was thrown in prison, and they put a dictator called the Shah in power. For the next 25 years, he would torture and murder anyone who dared to speak against him. All for oil, my friends. All for oil. The next year, 1954, Guatemala. Now this one will really make your blood boil. There was this company called United Fruit. You know them today as Chiquita Bananas. They owned huge plantations in Guatemala, paid workers practically nothing, treated them like slaves. And then Guatemala elected a president named Jacobo Arbenz who said, hey, maybe we should give some unused land to our people so they don't starve. United Fruit couldn't have that, so they called their friends in Washington, and the CIA launched Operation PB Success. Yes, that was really the name. They bombed Guatemala City. They flooded the radio with propaganda. They armed right-wing death squads. And when the smoke cleared, Arbenz fled for his life. What followed was 40 years of civil war. 200,000 people died. Most of them were indigenous Mayans, whose only crime was being born on land that a fruit company wanted. The next time you see a Chiquita banana in the store, remember this story. By the 1960s, the CIA had learned something important. If you want to overthrow a government, you need a good excuse. And they found the perfect one: fighting communism. It didn't matter if the leader was actually communist or not. It didn't matter if they were democratically elected. All that mattered was that they stood in the way of American corporate profits. Let me tell you about a man named Patrice Lumumba. Just 35 years old, he became the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Congo. Brilliant, charismatic, full of hope for his people. On Independence Day, he gave a speech that made the colonial powers tremble. He said, "We are no longer your monkeys." He spoke of ending forced labor, of stopping the brutality and theft of Congo's wealth. Within months, the CIA received orders to eliminate him by any means necessary. They tried poison, they tried snipers. Finally, they just armed his enemies and let them do the dirty work. On January 17, 1961, Patrice Lumumba was shot by a firing squad. They dissolved his body in acid so there would be no grave for people to visit. And then they installed Mobutu, one of the most brutal dictators in African history. For 30 years, he plundered Congo, while his people starved, and American corporations got their cobalt, their diamonds, and their gold. 5 million people have died in Congo's wars since then. 5 million. All because a young man dared to dream that Africans should control African resources. Now I want you to remember another September 11th, not 2001, but 1973, Santiago, Chile. There was a doctor there, a good man named Salvador Allende. He won the presidency promising to help the poor, to give workers better wages, and to make sure Chile's copper wealth stayed in Chile instead of flowing to American companies. Wall Street panicked. The CIA got its orders. For 3 years, they tried to destroy Chile's economy. They funded strikes, armed right-wing groups, crashed the currency. Finally, on the day of September 11, 1973, fighter jets roared over Santiago. They bombed the presidential palace. Salvador Allende died in that building, whether by his own hand or theirs, we'll never know. Then came Augusto Pinochet. For 17 years, this monster ruled Chile. He tortured 40,000 people. He murdered 3,200. He threw hundreds from helicopters into the ocean. But American corporations got their copper. And economists from the University of Chicago turned Chile into their laboratory for free market capitalism, built on mass graves. The 1980s brought us Ronald Reagan, the man who called murderous terrorists freedom fighters and made brutality official policy. In Nicaragua, something beautiful had happened. The people had overthrown one of the most brutal dictatorships in Latin America. The Sandinistas were bringing literacy programs, healthcare, hope, but they also challenged American corporate control, so Reagan's CIA created the Contras. Freedom fighters, he called them. Let me tell you what these freedom fighters really did. They targeted teachers bringing literacy to remote villages. They murdered healthcare workers treating sick children. They raped nuns. They burned crops and schools and clinics. And when Congress said, "Stop funding these terrorists," what did the CIA do? They sold weapons to Iran, America's supposed enemy, and used the profits to keep the war going. 30,000 Nicaraguans died. In a country of just 3 million people, that's like losing 3 million Americans today. And what happened to the CIA officials who ran this illegal war? Oliver North got his own TV show. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. The Cold War is over. Surely now America would stop overthrowing governments, right? Surely democracy would be safe. Oh, my friends, how naive we were. Let me ask you something. If a country's people elect a leader you don't like, but they elect him fairly and democratically, what right does America have to overthrow him? Hugo Chavez wasn't perfect, but he was elected. And his crime? Instead of letting American oil companies take Venezuela's wealth, he used it to build hospitals, schools, and subsidized food programs for the poor. In April 11, 2002, military officers storm the presidential palace. They arrest Chavez. A businessman with CIA connections declares himself president. Washington immediately recognizes the coup, but then something beautiful happened. The Venezuelan people, millions of them, poured into the streets. They surrounded the palace. They demanded their president back. Within 48 hours, the coup collapsed. Democracy won, but America never stopped trying to destroy Venezuela's economy and overthrow its government. Let me talk about Haiti, the first country where enslaved people freed themselves. For over 200 years, the world has been punishing Haiti for that crime. Jean-Bertrand Aristide was a priest who spoke for the poorest of the poor. Twice, the Haitian people elected him president, and twice, America helped overthrow him. In February 29, 2004, American forces literally kidnapped President Aristide. They put him on a plane and flew him to exile in Africa. They claimed he resigned. He called it what it was, a coup. UN peacekeepers arrived to restore order. They brought cholera that killed 10,000 people. They raped women and children. They protected the rich while the poor suffered. Haiti remains occupied by foreign forces to this day. The year was 2010, when across the Arab world, young people rose up demanding dignity, democracy, jobs. It was beautiful, it was hopeful, and America crushed it wherever it threatened corporate interests. Let's talk about Libya. Muammar Gaddafi was no angel, but under his rule, Libya had the highest standard of living in Africa. Free healthcare, free education, and oil wealth that was actually shared with the people. But Gaddafi made fatal mistakes. He was planning a gold-backed African currency that would challenge the dollar. He wanted to keep Libya's oil for Libyans. He had to go. NATO's bombs destroyed Libya's infrastructure. The country broke apart into warring factions. And for the first time in over a century, slave markets returned to Africa. Hundreds of thousands fled across the Mediterranean. Many drowned in the crossing. Those who survived faced racism and hatred in Europe. But Libya's oil flows freely to Western corporations now. Mission accomplished. Now come towards Syria, one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, reduced to rubble. The official story is simple. Assad bad, rebels good. America supports democracy. The truth is far uglier. Declassified documents show the plan. Arm extremist groups, create chaos, overthrow the government. The CIA spent billions of dollars funding groups that included Al-Qaeda affiliates. 500,000 people died. 12 million became refugees. An entire generation of Syrian children has known nothing but war, all for pipeline routes and geopolitical advantage. The 21st century brought new tools for old imperial games. Why risk a messy military coup when you can wage war through social media, economic pressure, and cyber attacks? In Ukraine, 2014, it was complicated. The protests against President Yanukovych had real grievances, corruption, poverty. But listen to this. This is a leaked phone call between two top U.S. officials discussing who should lead Ukraine after they remove the elected president. Arseniy Yatsenyuk became prime minister right after the coup. Just a coincidence, I'm sure. The U.S. spent $5 billion promoting democracy in Ukraine. The result? A civil war that killed 14,000 people and eventually led to the conflict we see today. Evo Morales, Bolivia's first indigenous president. For 14 years, he lifted millions out of poverty and gave dignity to native peoples who had been oppressed for centuries. His mistake. Bolivia has the world's largest lithium reserves, the key ingredient in phone and laptop batteries. And Morales wanted to process it in Bolivia, creating jobs for Bolivians instead of just exporting raw materials. The 2019 election was close but fair. International observers found no fraud. But the Organization of American States, controlled by Washington, cried fraud anyway. The military suggested Morales resign. What followed was a year of terror against indigenous people, but foreign corporations got access to Bolivia's lithium. The Bolivian people courageously voted Morales' party back into power in 2020, but the message was clear. Challenge American corporate interest at your own peril. Let's step back for a moment, my friends. Let's count the real cost of this empire built on coups and invasions. The numbers are staggering. Millions dead. Entire regions destabilized. Democracies destroyed. Dictators installed. And supported. But these aren't just numbers on a screen. Every single one represents a human life. A mother who never saw her child grow up. A father who died defending his homeland. Children who grew up as orphans. And for what? So that a handful of corporations could maximize their profits. So that oil, copper, lithium, and coffee could flow cheaply to Western markets. While stock prices soared, children starved. While corporate executives bought yachts, villages burned. While politicians gave speeches about freedom, democracy died in the shadows. But here's the thing about empires, my friends. The poison they spread abroad always comes home eventually. The surveillance techniques perfected on foreign populations are now used on American citizens. The military equipment used in occupied territories is now given to American police departments. The same economic policies imposed on Latin America, privatization, deregulation, union busting, came home to destroy American manufacturing cities. A country that spent 70 years overthrowing foreign governments now struggles to maintain its own democratic institutions. The chickens have come home to roost. But this story isn't just about oppression and death. It's also about resistance, about courage, about ordinary people who refuse to bow down to empire. In Argentina, mothers marched every Thursday holding photos of their disappeared children. Their courage helped bring down a military dictatorship. In Mexico, indigenous communities have built autonomous zones based on dignity and democracy. They've shown that another world is possible. Around the world, people are waking up. They're connecting the dots. They understand that their struggles are connected, that the same forces oppressing people in Palestine are the same ones backing coups in Latin America. And that includes you, my friend watching this right now. You are part of this awakening. So what can you do? How can you help dismantle an empire built over 70 years? First, keep learning. Share this video. Read the books and documents I'll list at the end. Understand how empire operates so you can recognize it happening today. Support independent media. The corporate press won't tell these stories because they're owned by the same interests that profit from war. Fund journalists who speak truth to power. Get involved locally. Join organizations fighting for peace and justice. Support candidates who oppose militarism. Demand transparency from your government. Most importantly, talk to people. Break the silence. The most powerful weapon against empire is truth. When enough people understand how the system really works, they can't maintain it anymore. Imagine a different world, my friends. Imagine if the trillions spent on weapons were invested in schools and hospitals. Imagine if American power was used to lift up the world instead of keeping it down. That world is possible. It's not just a dream. All around the globe, people are building alternatives, cooperative businesses, community land trusts, local energy systems, direct democracy. Climate change is forcing this transformation anyway. We can either consciously build a more just world or watch civilization collapse under the weight of our contradictions. The choice is ours. Every single one of us gets to decide what kind of world we want to live in. We've traveled together through 70 years of secret wars, stolen elections, and murdered dreams. We've seen how empire operates, how it justifies itself, and how it destroys everything beautiful in this world. But we've also seen that empires fall, that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they come together. That truth, once spoken, can never be silenced. 50 coups, millions of deaths, trillions of dollars, all to build an empire that serves the few at the expense of the many. But the story doesn't end here. The final chapter is being written right now, by you, by me, by all of us who refuse to accept that this is just how the world has to be. The empire is cracking, truth is spreading, and the people of the world are waking up. What will you do with this knowledge? Thank you for watching, my friends. I know this wasn't easy to hear, but now you know. And knowledge carries responsibility. Share this video, start conversations, question everything you're told about foreign policy and war. The resources for learning more are in the description below. The fight for a better world needs you. Until next time, keep seeking truth.